Munich, November 9th, 1923. The Beer Hall Putsch had just collapsed. Adolf Hitler, dragged from hiding, was being marched through Residenzstrasse under guard when an elderly woman broke through the brown shirt cordon. Before anyone could react, she slapped him across the face, full force in front of hundreds. Hitler froze, hand to his reddened cheek. His SA soldiers lunged forward, ready to drag her away. But Hitler raised his hand. "Stop," he said. Then he leaned close, and she whispered something no one else could hear. What she said made him give an order that shocked every Nazi present. Let her go. She walked away untouched. The future dictator, humiliated in public, let his assailant disappear into the crowd. Nazi mythology never mentioned this moment, but the reason he spared her? That changed everything. The official story of November 9th, 1923 is well documented. Adolf Hitler and General Erich Ludendorff led a failed coup attempt in Munich, the Beer Hall Putsch. By midday, the uprising had collapsed. Police opened fire at the Feldherrenhalle, killing 16 Nazis. Hitler fled and was arrested 2 days later at a supporters' villa. The trial that followed turned him into a national figure. His imprisonment at Landsberg gave him time to write Mein Kampf. That's the version in every history book. But there's a moment missing. Between the gunfire and the arrest, Hitler walked through Munich streets surrounded by witnesses. Some cheered, some jeered, and one elderly woman did something no one expected. Nazi records never mentioned her. The witnesses who saw it were silenced, dismissed, or ignored. But she existed, and what she did left a mark Hitler couldn't erase. Her name was Anna Hoffmann, 67 years old in 1923, a seamstress in Munich's Glockenbach district. She lived in a modest apartment with her daughter, Marie, who worked in a bakery. Anna had lost her only son, Franz, at Verdun in 1916. He was 19. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. By 1922, Anna had heard Adolf Hitler speak at the Bürgerbräukeler. He promised to avenge Germany's fallen soldiers, to restore the nation's honor, to punish those who'd betrayed the men who died. Anna believed him, briefly. Then she saw the Sturmabteilung in action. Brown-shirted thugs beating shopkeepers, breaking windows of Jewish-owned businesses, smashing printing presses. Hitler's movement wasn't about honoring the dead. It was about using their memory to justify violence. When the putsch began on November 8th, Anna followed the news closely. By the morning of November 9th, when it collapsed, she knew Hitler would try to flee. And she knew the route. Residenzstrasse was the most direct path from the Bürgerbräukeler to the safe houses in the suburbs. Anna stood near the corner, wearing the leather gloves Franz had sent her in his last letter. She'd kept them for 7 years. They were cracked now, stiff from age. A crowd had gathered, some Nazi supporters hoping for a last stand, others drawn by curiosity. Around midday, Hitler appeared, flanked by SA guards and a few loyalists. He looked disheveled, his face pale. The triumphant rhetoric of the night before had evaporated. Police were closing in. Anna pushed through the crowd. She was small, elderly, easy to overlook. The guards were watching for threats. Young men, weapons, police. They didn't see her until she was already there. She reached Hitler, pulled off her right glove, and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the street. Hitler staggered. His hand flew to his cheek. The guards grabbed her, arms, And then Hitler did something no one expected. He raised his hand. Stop! The guards froze. Hitler stared at Anna. She stared back. Her eyes were hard, unflinching. Then Hitler leaned close and said something, too quiet for the crowd to hear. Anna responded, just a few words. Witnesses later said Hitler's face went white. He straightened, stepped back, and gave the order. Let her go. The guards released her. Anna turned and walked away through the silent crowd. No one stopped her. No one followed. Hitler continued toward his escape, but his hand stayed on his cheek. The whole encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds. By evening, he was in hiding. 2 days later, police arrested him at Ernst Hanfstengel's villa in Uffing. The trial began in February 1924. The slap was never mentioned, but people in Munich remembered, and word spread, quietly, carefully, that something had happened on Residenzstrasse, something the Nazis didn't want discussed. Within a week of Hitler's arrest, SA members began visiting witnesses. The baker who'd been standing near Anna's position got a midnight knock on his door. 3 brown shirts told him he'd seen nothing. A photographer claimed he'd taken a picture of the incident. His studio was ransacked, and the negative never surfaced. A journalist for a small Munich paper wrote a brief mention of an altercation during Hitler's apprehension. The editor pulled the story. The journalist was beaten 2 days later. This wasn't unusual. The Nazis were experts at controlling narratives even before they held power. But the effort suggested something deeper. If the slap had been just an embarrassment, a random old woman lashing out, they could have spun it as martyrdom. Hitler, attacked by enemies of the Reich. Instead, they buried it. That meant the slap itself wasn't the problem. It was what Anna had said, and Hitler's response. Letting her go suggested weakness, or something worse. Anna returned to her apartment that evening and set the leather gloves on the kitchen table. Marie was waiting, frantic. What did you do? Anna said nothing at first. She made tea, sat by the window. Finally, she said, I told him the truth. Marie asked what that meant. Anna didn't elaborate. Over the following days, Marie noticed men watching the building. They didn't approach. They didn't threaten. They just watched. Anna continued her daily routine. Sewing, shopping, visiting Franz's grave at the Waldfriedhof Cemetery. She brought flowers every Sunday. The men followed her there too, but kept their distance. Marie begged her mother to leave Munich. Anna refused. They won't touch me, she said. When Marie asked how she knew, Anna said, because he gave the order. It was true. Hitler, even from Landsberg prison, had sent word through Rudolf Hess. Watch her. Don't harm her. The order confused the SA, but they followed it. In December 1923, Rudolf Hess, Hitler's loyal deputy, visited Anna's apartment. He was polite. He asked if he could speak with her privately. Marie hovered in the doorway. Hess sat at the small kitchen table, the leather gloves still visible. He asked Anna directly, What did you say to him? Anna looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, He heard it. That's enough. Hess tried again. He offered money, enough to live comfortably for years. Anna refused. He offered protection, papers to leave Germany if she wanted. She refused. Finally, Hess made a veiled threat. The Führer has many loyal followers. If something were to happen, Anna cut him off. He won't let anything happen to me. Hess blinked. Anna continued, because if your men touch me, everyone will ask why. And he doesn't want that question. Hess left without another word. But he reported back to Landsberg, and Hitler responded with a new instruction. At Landsberg prison, Hitler spent his days dictating Mein Kampf to Hess and Emil Maurice. The text railed against Jews, Marxists, the Treaty of Versailles. But privately, Hitler wrote letters. One, dated January 1924, went to Hess. It contained a single line. Find out what her son's name was. Hess investigated. It didn't take long. Anna Hoffman, seamstress. Son, Franz Hoffman, died at Verdun, June 1916, age 19. Hess sent the information back. Hitler's reply came 3 days later. I understand now. That was all. But the implication was clear. What Anna had said on Residenzstrasse wasn't a random insult. It was specific. It was about Franz. And it struck at the core of Hitler's public mythology. The Nazi movement built itself on the memory of Germany's war dead. Fallen soldiers were sacred. Their sacrifice justified everything. The rage, the revanchism, the demand for a new order. Hitler positioned himself as the avenger of men like Franz Hoffmann. But Anna, Franz's mother, had looked Hitler in the eye and told him he'd betrayed that promise. The exact words remain unknown. But people close to the situation later speculated. Some said she told him, "My son died believing your lies." Others claimed she said, "You dishonor his memory." One account suggested she simply said, "Franz would be ashamed of you." Whatever the words, they hit harder than any political speech or manifesto, because they were personal and true, and Hitler couldn't refute them without admitting his entire narrative was a fiction. So he did the only thing he could. He let her walk away. Anna Hoffman lived quietly until her death in 1929. She was never harassed. Again, after Hess's visit, the watchers eventually disappeared. She continued sewing, attending church, visiting Franz's grave. Marie married in 1926 and moved to Stuttgart. Anna stayed in Munich. When she died, natural causes, age 73. There was no mention of the Residenzstrasse incident in her obituary. The leather gloves passed to Marie, who kept them in a drawer. They disappeared sometime during the war. By then, Hitler had risen to absolute power. The Beer Hall Putsch was commemorated every year as a heroic failure. The 16 Nazis killed at the Feldherrnhalle were martyrs. Streets and buildings were named after them. But Anna's slap? Never mentioned, never acknowledged. Few witnesses survived into the post-war period. Some were interviewed by historians in the 1950s and 60s. Their accounts varied in details, but agreed on the core facts. An elderly woman, a slap, Hitler's order to release her. One former SA member, speaking anonymously in 1961, said, "We thought he'd gone mad, letting some old woman humiliate him like that. But later, we understood. She was the mother of a fallen soldier. Touching her would have been worse than letting it go." That calculation, cold, political, self-preserving, was vintage Hitler. He understood optics, and he understood that some enemies were more dangerous punished than ignored. Anna fell into that category, not because she was powerful, but because her moral authority was unassailable. In 1938, at the height of Nazi power, Hitler attended the annual Nuremberg rally. 1 million people filled the Zeppelin field. Torches, banners, chants, Albert Speer's architecture of light. Hitler stood on a stone platform, arms raised, the embodiment of total authority. But that night, in his private quarters, he sketched. This wasn't unusual. Hitler fancied himself an artist, but the subject was a woman's face, elderly, hard eyes, thin lips. Underneath, he wrote a date, November 9th, 1923. No name, just the date. Hess saw the sketch once and asked about it. Time, 0.95s. Hitler said nothing. But the fact that he kept it, that he remembered her face 15 years later, revealed something. Guilt? Possibly. Rage? Maybe. Or just the simple, uncomfortable truth that Anna Hoffman had spoken aloud what Hitler spent his entire political career trying to suppress. That his promises to honor the war dead were hollow. That he used their sacrifice as a prop. That he would have horrified men like Franz Hoffmann if they'd lived to see what their deaths were used to justify. This truth couldn't be killed with a slap back, couldn't be silenced with threats, couldn't be erased with propaganda. So it lived in Hitler's memory, in the witnesses who stayed quiet but didn't forget, in the gloves that passed from Anna to Marie to no one. The slap was public, the words were private, but the damage was permanent. After the war, historians tried to verify the Residenzstrasse incident. The Nazi Party's meticulous records made no mention of it. No photographs surfaced, but oral testimony persisted. A shopkeeper who'd been in the crowd, a nurse who treated one of the wounded Nazis, a former SA member who admitted decades later, it happened. We were told never to speak of it. Why did it matter? In the grand scope of Hitler's crimes, a single slap seems trivial, but symbols matter. And this symbol cut both ways. For Hitler, it represented the one public humiliation he couldn't rewrite. He could spin the putsch as heroic. He could turn prison into a myth-making opportunity. But he couldn't make Anna Hoffman into a villain. She was too sympathetic. A grieving mother, a war widow. Everything his propaganda claimed to honor. So he buried her. Not literally. He couldn't risk that. But historically, erased her from the record. Let the witnesses scatter. Hoped time would finish the job. It almost worked. But stories don't die as easily as people. And this one, the old woman who slapped Hitler and walked away, it survived. Passed down through families. Whispered in Munich, beer halls, repeated by aging witnesses. It survived because it was true, and because it mattered. It showed that even at the beginning, when Hitler was still just a failed revolutionary, someone had the courage to tell him exactly what he was. Not in an essay, not in a speech, but face to face with a slap and a truth he couldn't escape. The gloves disappeared during the war. Marie's home in Stuttgart was bombed in 1944. Most of her possessions were destroyed. If the gloves survived, they ended up in rubble or ash. But their absence is fitting. The story was never really about the gloves. It was about what they represented. A son's last gift. A mother's grief. A promise broken. A truth spoken. In 1945, when the Third Reich collapsed and the full scope of Hitler's atrocities became known, the Residenzstrasse slap felt almost quaint. What was one moment of public humiliation compared to the Holocaust? To the war? To the millions dead? But proportionality isn't the point. The slap mattered because it revealed something Hitler spent 12 years in power trying to hide. That his entire ideology was built on a lie. that the men who died at Verdun and the Somme and the Marne didn't die for 1,000-year Reich. They died because empires sent them to die, and their deaths didn't mean what Hitler said they meant. Anna Hoffmann knew this. She knew it because she'd loved Franz, because she'd read his letters, because she'd buried him. And when she saw Hitler, this man who claimed to speak for her son, she did the only thing that made sense. She slapped him, not out of rage, out of clarity. And Hitler, for all his bluster, knew she was right. So he let her go, because punishing her would have required him to explain why. And he couldn't do that without admitting the truth. Anna Hoffmann died in her sleep on a cold morning in March 1929. She was 73. Her funeral was small. Marie came from Stuttgart. A few neighbors attended. There were flowers on Franz's grave already. Anna had visited 2 days before. The priest said kind words about her patience, her faith, her skill with a needle. No one mentioned Residenzstrasse. No one needed to. By 1929, Hitler was rebuilding the Nazi Party. The SA was growing. The storm was coming. But Anna wasn't there to see it. Maybe that was mercy. She'd said what she needed to say. She'd done what she came to do. And she'd walked away on her own terms. The gloves stayed with Marie. The memory stayed with Hitler. And the truth? That stayed exactly where Anna left it. The leather gloves are gone. The witnesses are dead. The sketch Hitler drew in 1938 was likely destroyed with the rest of his personal effects. But the story endures, because it's the kind of story people need. The powerful humiliated, the powerless speaking truth, the small act of courage that changes nothing and everything. Anna Hoffmann didn't stop Hitler. She didn't prevent the war or save a single life. But she did something no general, no politician, no philosopher managed to do. She looked him in the eye and told him he was a fraud. And he knew it. That's why he let her go. That's why he sketched her face 15 years later. The gloves stayed in Anna's hands until she died. The slap stayed in Hitler's memory until he didn't. And the truth, that never went anywhere.